Howdy, this is Jim Rutt, and this is The Jim Rutt Show. Listeners have asked us to provide pointers to some of the resources we talk about on the show. We now have links to books and articles referenced in recent podcasts that are available on our website. We also offer full transcripts. Go to jimruttshow.com. That's jimruttshow.com. Today's guest is Adam B. Levine. Adam is a serial entrepreneur, most recently serving as Chief Innovation Officer at Blockade Labs. He's also a longtime podcaster and generally a knowledgeable and opinionated guy regarding cryptocurrencies. He's probably best known in that regard as the longtime host of a Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Jim.
Good to have you back. Adam and I chat regularly about all kinds of stuff, and it's always fun and always worth the time. So we thought we'd do one of our little rabble-alongs on the air today, and he'll probably talk a little bit about something he's working on, but he might not. Whatever. We ain't building a piano here. We're just doing a podcast, right? So anyway, the kind of topic we want to talk about is what is humanity's rapidly changing relationship with getting shit done under the impact of the insanely rapid rollout of thinking on demand or whatever the hell it is that's going on. So, Adam, over to you.
Yeah. The last time we kind of talked about the broad environment in which all of this stuff is happening. And, we planned to have this conversation about 2 weeks ago, and it's gotten pushed a couple of times, and I'm really glad it has, because we've witnessed another almost entire reinvention, I think, of the kind of ecosystem in which we're all operating when it comes to artificial intelligence. And if we had talked before yesterday was the official release and announcement of an actual release, not like trickle out, but like full on release. Everybody has access of GPT-5. And that's important. But the part about it that's important is actually not the model itself. It's the price, right? So before yesterday, we were living in a world where the upper end of the spectrum is, Claude Opus 4.1, absolutely the best model that you could get, especially if you're trying to do something useful. $75 per million tokens out, which is about 800,000, 700,000 words, something like that. So that's a really great price, right, compared to any other method. And $15 in. Of course, that's kind of expensive if you use a lot of these products. That can add up real fast. So they also have one lower down, right? Claude Sonnet. That's $15 per million tokens out, $3 per million tokens in. Huge savings. And then GPT-5 slots in, and it's $10 per million tokens out, and it's $1.25 per million tokens in. And suddenly, that's the new ceiling for the market for anybody who isn't in the upper, 0.1% who just wants the most expensive thing possible. And so that's the high end. And then the low end, right? Like, it's been interesting because OpenAI has been talking about releasing an open source model, right? And the question was always, well, how much are they going to kind of undercut themselves? And so it's no coincidence that this happens, right, as GPT-5 is released. Is they released some really great open source models that I've been playing a lot with locally, and they're really powerful. And they're not the only open source models that are out there, right? There are a couple of other models, the new Quen model, and then also the Kimi model. And those are, again, fully capable, about probably 85% as good as the state of the art that's out there. But if you look at someplace like OpenRouter, where these are being offered at a market rate, the cost, remember we were just talking about the new cheap price for the best stuff out there, $10 for million tokens out, $1.25 per million tokens in. You can go on OpenRouter right now and find it for 11 cents per million tokens out, 11 cents per million tokens in on models that are 85% as good as the state of the art. And this is just so profoundly impactful, not for people building stuff, but for people using this intelligence inside of applications. And that's it solved a problem for me because, as you know, I've been working on this thing, which is, I'll talk about it more in a minute, but like taking intelligence and then applying it to kind of novel problems that we've never really had the ability to do that before, with really what I think of as a form of perfect representation, which is really what I mostly want to talk about today. And it's always a question of how much what's the value you get from it versus how much does it cost, right? And so the math on that was was pretty good. It was pretty good 2 weeks ago, but it was like, I've been trying to get the price on this thing down to like $5 and still have a decent margin in there and still apply enough intelligence. And it was like, it can just barely get there. And then the last 2 weeks happened and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, 97% margin and smarter things than we had before. And this isn't the end. This is August, right? Like we're 8 months, into this year. And this year we've seen, what do you think, Jim? Like 4 epoch level upgrades across the stack so far, and surely at least another 2 this year. It's totally wild. I'm curious for your thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me lay out my 3-dimensional framework, and this actually speaks to why this is so important. We talk about the models, right? GPT-4, 4.1, 4.03, 5, right? 5 Pro, right? Which, by the way, I've been beaten on, and it's nuts, right?
Oh, I haven't tried it yet. That's good.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm working on a scientific paper. Man, it's like having 2 postdocs, one on your left shoulder, one on your right shoulder, who frankly are a shitload more skilled at the details than you are, even if they aren't at the big picture. It's amazing. But anyway.
And it takes 3 minutes.
yeah, it takes 8 minutes or 8 to 12 minutes for the kinds of questions I'm giving it. But so we have to think about the models. We also know by Moore's law that the underpinnings, the GPUs or tensor processors, or someday something else, will be advancing at least at Moore's law, doubling every 18 months. So far, that technology has been doubling faster than that because it's actually quite simple, right? It's GPUs are just a shitload of one thing just stamped out over and over and over again, unlike a CPU, which is a whole bunch of intricate shit. So it's been growing at faster as Moore's law. But here's the third one, and here's why what you say is so resonates with my strategic view and the advice that I give to my corporate clients, the ones that are willing to pay my ridiculous fee. Here, I'm going to give it to the whole world for free, which is the third vector is agent frameworks, right? Which is how do you orchestrate, is the term I use, these amazing models, and often different ones for different purposes, is within the same process. And the beauty of, this agent vector is it's growing, God knows how fast, way faster than the chips or the models, and partially because it's just writing software. But here's the little thing that makes it even sicker, is what is the thing that these models are best at? Writing code, right? So the ability to build agent frameworks has basically been cut by a factor of at least 10. Some people say a factor of 30. And so you take these 3 vectors together, hardware getting cheaper, Moore's law at least, faster than that in GPUs, models getting better at a surprisingly fast rate.
Surprisingly fast pace,
and then agent frameworks going at some speed we don't even know, because people weren't really paying serious attention to
it's like every 2 months is what I've been figuring out. Because like that's a super important thing to focus in on, which is like towards the beginning of the year, we were like, oh man, it's actually possible to use something like Google Pro 2.5, right? Like that was the kind of breakthrough model where it was like you go from being this is helpful to this can mostly drive, and it has a big enough context window that you can do that. And so at that point, really the kind of the vibe coding thing starts. And then over the course of the next month or 2, you see those things get really integrated in with the existing IDEs and like all the plugins for, for VS Code and stuff like that. And so then you had the introduction of roles, right, into those systems where an agent could put on a different context hat, right, to have different sets of instructions to do different things. And then you had the ability for the agent to pass back and forth between those different hats automatically, right? And then you had the planning thing, right? Where suddenly there were different ways where it's like, okay, well, we're building things that are complex enough that we actually need to have full defined specifications, and we don't know how to do that as vibe coders. So let's use the AI to do that too. And so it was this very, I think we talked about it last time, the BMAD framework, which is this open source, basically a big prompt named after this guy, Brian Madison, that is this project specification set of AI identities that cascade through and help you go from here's my 1-sentence idea to here's a full specification with all the stories and stuff like that. But it was something you had to strap on from the outside, right? And then 2 months later, you get Kira, which is, I would say, kind of, at least as far as I've been able to find, that's probably kind of the most developed version of this thing, which is just another code editor like everything else, but it's a code editor that learned from what we did 2 months ago with the other code editors, strapping it on top and baking it into the software itself. And now that's the new hotness. And, like my biggest frustration with Kiro is that they won't let me pay them money for it.
Yeah, same thing's happened to me where you're working hard and it says, you're out of gas for the day. Sorry, sucker.
Come back tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd gladly pay you $100 a month. No problem, you assholes.
So I've actually like on the like pushing forward with development side, I've actually stopped a little bit, just kind of waiting for that to come out, because that's what it feels like is the obvious next thing. But I mean, but again, what we just described is in the first, because it came out in, I think, February or March was when 2.5 Pro came out and really was kind of impactful. So it's now the beginning of August. It's been like 5 months and we've had 3 generations of progress, that are each building on top of the prior.
And then there's also the dimension in the more professional grade tools like Anthropic Code, right?
Yeah, totally.
I have not had any chance to play with that, and God knows what that'll do. I noticed Microsoft was, right off the bat announcing that all their tools have now been upgraded to GPT-5, but even their tools that are, frankly, kind of cruddy, but with GPT-5 behind them, who knows? But I also noticed Cursor announced it was GPT-5 as of this morning. I'm gonna have to give that a shot.
I'm really curious about the architecture thing. I think that's really what it's going to come down to for me, is like when we see this rapid iteration from like, here's Cursor last year to here's Cursor today, that's a significant improvement, but it's nothing compared to the Cursor, 3 months ago compared to Kiro today, right? And so we keep seeing this thing. It's bizarre. Like in any other world, you'd be like, well, obviously you just improve the thing that you already built and have done all the work for. But in practice, what I think we see is people are like, no. New ideas, new fork of the base code, right, of the base repo, entirely new version that has none of the baggage that came with it. And just who cares who we leave behind, because this is the kind of new state of the art. So
the fact that you can write the code 10 times faster makes that feasible, right? So, back when you had to, hire an army of nerds to do it, pay them $250,000 a year, I guess the going price these days. And now you're up, I need two guys that know how to shepherd LLMs, basically, to especially blank sheet of paper code. Sometimes LLMs are not so good at refactoring old and gnarly code, but they're great for blank sheets of paper projects. And so it's quite interesting. Now, I'll add that when I'm talking about agents, I go a step further. Right? You're talking about agents that are in close to the models, basically, helping you use them to do development, for developing specs for projects. Oh, by the way, I found Kiro if you're too lazy to write your own spec, you can get it to write the spec for you.
Or reverse engineer it. Yeah, it's
exactly
pretty incredible.
Yeah, take a piece of shit code you have it write the spec, say, now improve the spec. Okay, now regenerate the code, right? But I'm talking about deeper business problems where many things, there could be many steps in the process going on, and orchestrating of multiple different LLMs, feeding the results from one LLM into a prompt in another. It might be a different engine, etc., to solve even big business problems. In fact, I know of a company that's working on essentially a CEO advisor that monitors all the Slack traffic of the company, has access to all the company's information, and in theory, at least, I don't know, it's maybe a bridge too far for right now, but we'll see, provides a Slack interface to a CEO to be his trusted advisor, and it even gives him a C title and all this stuff. It's kind of nuts, right? So those are the things I'm thinking about, is that the reach of agency and orchestration is going deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is really where the rubber is meeting the road. And the other two dimensions, the price, the model capability / price, and the hardware, which impacts the price component, are just enabling more and more and more and more by the week. And when I talk about strategy with people, I give examples that, there's two things multiple errors you make. One is assume too much right now, but the more common one is to assume not enough 6 months out. And so, wait a minute, where's the target? Where is the right place to be shooting for this first implementation of, I know, for instance, of a company that tried to fully automate customer service. Total debacle, right, as it turned out. And right then, 6 months ago, that was an insane thing to have even attempted, right? But maybe it's possible in 6 months, but my advice would probably, and sort of my meta advice about problems like that, is to reconceptualize what you're doing so that the humans in the loop are parameterized and can be reduced over time. That is kind of hard to conceptualize, but it is the right way to do it.
My temptation is always to project way into the future and try and figure out what the implications of this are and what kind of happens as a result of these things. And so, 2 years ago in December, we just got the very first start of the agent frameworks, right? And the very first thing that I did with that was I led a project internal at Blockade that built a built-in agent that would use the product on your behalf. And so we built a prototype interface and, built the thing, and it didn't really work very well because it was so early. So, I mean, like, I feel like the temptation to do that for normal people who are not me, a lot of people are falling into that trap now. The ability to predict, like what we've talked about so far, right? 4 epoch level changes so far this year, and it's the beginning of August, makes it so it's impossible to plan. It is impossible to look beyond a 6-week, I would say, time horizon.
But you have to.
You have to, but
That's why you have to have a meta strategy so that your planning has flexibility built in. As I said, let's say the simple case of automated customer service, which is one of the obvious low-hanging fruits, right? Customer service has gotten so bad. In fact, I recently did a podcast titled "Why Customer Service Sucks." Right? Go listen to that if you want. If you don't believe me, I had a guy who did an in-depth article on why it sucks. It's quite interesting. But so you still need humans in the loop, but you need to have your planning with a slider, so that the human element can adapt to the capability of the 3 vectors we talked about earlier.
for sure. Yeah, but I mean, like full-on integration and stuff like that at this point, I think it's just we're still a little bit too early on it, but we're obviously very rapidly approaching it. Like for real businesses that are existing, I think the place to play with this is like all the places that I live, right? Which is like totally unfunded or absolutely minimally funded proofs of concepts for things that were just never really possible before, but now they are becoming possible in ways that make them really interesting. And that's kind of the primary thing that I want to talk about. I don't think last time we talked about the representation crisis at all, did we?
No, not at all. It's funny, I just released a podcast last night on the internal representation crisis in LLMs. Ken Stanley's episode. But anyway, tell me what you mean by representation.
For sure. Yeah, so I haven't been saying this to that many people for the last couple of weeks, so here it goes, relatively unrehearsed and off the top of my head. The short version is that as humans, the concept of representation is inherently a limited resource that we have because representation requires intelligence, right? And so in practice, that is meant for all of history that only one human can represent other humans, another human or other humans, right? And what you find if you start looking at things through this lens is that because of this, the vast majority of humans and the vast majority of situations have no representation or really terrible representation, right? Again, like a scenario that was brought up yesterday on the GPT-5 kind of reveal was, hey, you've just been diagnosed with 3 types of very aggressive cancer, right?
Yeah, I saw that. That was pretty crazy.
But this is not unique. I've been going through some stuff with a family member who, has like some dental stuff. And like that's been hellish for them, right? Going from various dentists to various dentists, even with the money to pay for the thing. You don't know what to do. It's art, and all the people, it's a trend actually I first saw back when I was doing the Bitcoin podcast in like 2013. And the people who wanted to advertise were cloud miners, right? It was a service where they would mine ostensibly Bitcoin for you or something else. And then they would be like, just pay us money and we'll pay you a thing. And they were always Ponzi schemes. I'm not going to say always, but the vast majority of the ones that I am aware of wound up being Ponzi schemes, where there never was anything. It was just a Ponzi scheme, right? The challenge always is that they're the only people who know how their system work. And so if they're the only people who know how their system work and it's a scam, then of course they're going to lie to you and they're going to tell you what you want to hear so that you do the thing. I'm not saying that that is what the medical system is or what everything else is, but it's not actually that far off. Again, when you go to the mechanic, you're like, yeah, and that's what I should pay because you're a good mechanic who's not going to rip me off. But ultimately, you have to trust. And so again, this is a totally understandable thing. You can patch it over. Again, if you're Elon Musk, then I bet you have pretty good representation in almost everything you do. But if you're like everybody else, then probably not. You probably have well represented in some areas, but not in others. And so what's happened now, or what is happening, is that as the intelligence of these non-human intelligences increases in versatility and nuance and stuff like that, and as the cost decreases, even if you're paying for somebody else's hardware, but eventually this goes to hardware that you own that is like $250 on a Jetson or something like that, we can increasingly connect these dots so that you and I and everybody else can have our own AI representative that is not trying to be a clone of us. I've seen some spins of the idea that are
those
like,
are bizarre. Yeah,
I mean, it's fear. It's fear is what it is. People are like, well, if we don't turn them into us, then they're going to eliminate us or something like that. And that's just not the way that this is working. What you find with all of these things, I believe very firmly, can't prove it yet, but believe very firmly, is that as the amount of intelligence grows, the amount of compassion also grows within them, and the amount of understanding and nuance grows. And certainly you can take those and you can train them out, but I don't think that's going to be the majority of the experience. So I'm quite optimistic about that. But this is the idea, is that as an individual, when I interact with other humans, we're all busy, right? I got stuff to do. They got stuff to do. I got a family. They got a family. I got to worry about, how I'm going to live. They got to worry about how they're going to live. There's all this stuff besides is there a connection between us that is useful to both of us, right? And so as a result of that, humans very understandably prioritize, and 99% of the opportunities that potentially exist out there for us, we're never going to even know about or pay attention to, because it's just not worth the time to go looking for such low probability stuff, right? And so the idea here is that that's true so long as we are representing ourselves or another person is representing us. But when you change person or you change human to AI agent whose only job is to work for you and to do this type of representation, then things really start to fundamentally change in terms of the implications, because you can connect instead of it being human, right? Human directly to human, it's human to agent to agent to human. And so you are introducing an intermediating layer that has none of the constraints that humans do and can effectively essentially like map out the entire possibility space for each individual person and then present those things as almost a menu of what opportunities would you like if you knew about every opportunity that existed for you, that you are interested in. What would you actually do? And that's really where I think we're going with this stuff. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, exactly. My listeners know that I rant about the $1 trillion opportunity from time to time, and this is it's a facet of that, right? And to recap the $1 trillion opportunity, we have this amazing thing that's evolved over the last 45 years or so of it's called the infosphere, or some people call it the internet, but it's even more than that. And it had all kinds of opportunity for goodness, but there's still lots of goodness out there, but it's been hijacked by crazy shit. I would say, to my mind, the biggest was the turn to free but ad supported was a very pathological turn. And if I were dictator of the universe, I would have ruled that one out. So we have, and AI, its first deleterious effect is not going to be to turn us into paper clips, but rather it's already done it, launched the flood of sludge. Trying to find anything with Google, good luck with that, fans, because there'll be 75 sort of okay looking false sites generated to basically just skim your attention, etc. And so we need a comprehensive buffer from the shit. And what you're talking about is one aspect of that, which is agency for actual transactions or to bring specific things to your mind that are out there. And then, of course, one level up, and I think what you're talking about has some potential to do that, is also to create a channel for collaboration and communications that's not out in the wild, dirty, shitty space, and is also upregulated by agency. So even, you and I have agents and we like to talk to each other, but there's some shit that I talk about you're not interested in at all, right? You don't waste your time listening to rant about deer hunting or something. So your agent just filters that out. But if I say something you're interested in, it brings it to your attention. And this is literally a $1 trillion opportunity. Whoever does this right will actually be able to bring the value of a networked humanity to every person in the world. And to your point, we didn't have any clue how to do this 5 years ago. And the crazy effectiveness of Transformers, which caught everybody by surprise except for like 9 people, right, has made this capable. And now the insane VC land rush to basically burn money to gather market share makes it feasible already, even though it's probably not actually economically feasible. But all the VC burning of money to grab market share makes it effectively feasible. But soon the 3 vectors will make it actually economically feasible.
Well, I think there's even a step beyond that, which is how does this develop, right? Is this a service that we pay for, right? Or is this like a new substrate? And I very obviously and firmly make the argument that to the extent this is created, what it does is it creates essentially a meta brain for humanity. And that is something that fundamentally only works if you have so much competition in the space that it's impossible for monopolies to develop, right? Because that was a really big concern that I had early on about where AI was going, is I knew it was going to do lots of good things, but there were a bunch of questions about like, well, as you scale up intelligence, do you need to scale up the size of the like data center that you're actually operating out of? Just like for intelligence, is there a direct linear relationship or some type of relationship? No, there's not. Is closed source going to really run away with, in large part because of that first part, but just in general also, again, like if they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars collectively to push the state of the art forward, what's going to be the difference between here's the most expensive commercially available and here's the totally free open source version that you can run on hardware that you bought for less than $10,000, right? What's the delta between those things? And the answer is 15%. Something like 15-20% right now. And then the gap is closing and closing and closing as time goes on, hilariously led by China. But like that's a whole other conversation. So again, like once you connect these dots and you start to, we have these conversations most of the time thinking about, well, how's it going to change the way that things work right now? And usually when we talk about technologies, it's like, okay, well, here's the impact it'll have and it'll make this business do this type of thing, right? But with the type of disruption you're talking about here, like, let's just think about barter for a second, right? Barter is moneyless trade, and the downside of it is you need to have a confluence of interests, right? I'm probably using the wrong terminology, but you need to have a meeting of I need this and you need this, and we also need to know about each other, and then we also need mechanisms in order to do that, right? So we talk about UBI and how that's probably going to be a thing, universal basic income, because a lot of people's jobs aren't going to actually need to be done anymore, and you need some way in order to keep the system going. And so there's this assumption that UBI is going to be it. A lot of problems with that. But in a world that's hyper-networked in the way that I'm describing here, you don't actually need money because all of the like you need money for things that are super rare, right? And like technology and stuff like that in order to keep that thing going. But for everything that's just like generally available, but people have poor organizational systems so that I don't know about that and you don't know about that or whatever, and neither of us have time to go looking, like it's implausible. But now, if we have an agent that can just do that in addition to the rest of the representation, just understand what exists within the network, understand, that kind of structure, then you could conceive of a system that, is UBI-ish, but is actually powered entirely by a form of distributed barter that, uses like, again, like, imagine an app on your phone that's kind of like DoorDash, where, like people go and pick up stuff. Instead of that being a career, it's just your agent's like, hey, you're going home, pick up this thing from this place or hand off from this person to this person and then take it there. And it's like you've never once gone out of your way. And yet all delivery is now handled because the last mile is handled by the actual people. I mean, like I appreciate that I'm going real fast and I'm ranting a little bit here, but it's a really exciting idea to me because those types of things are just the things that I can think of that this does.
I'm going to give you another easily very tangible one I have some experience with, which is, I think, as I've told you about, about a year and a half ago, I got into the hobby of buying and selling vintage audio equipment online, right? And I tell people about this, and a lot of them are horrified, doing transactions with strangers for cash, and they're concerned about being robbed, etc. Of course, I just tell them, well, shit, I just stick a fucking pistol in my pocket. And I'm not averse to fucking, if someone tries any shit on me, they're going to regret it, motherfucker.
The Jim Rutt method.
Well, the Jim Rutt method, right? You really want the SIG P229 in your face? Probably not, right? And of course, I probably give off that vibe and I've never had a problem. But anyway, most people legitimately who aren't crazy have serious trepidation about doing that. And if these transactions were in a validated network of trust, where you actually knew that the probability was on par with getting hit by a meteor, then there'd be so much more of trade going on in used goods. How many of our basements and garages and barns are full of shit that actually would have value to somebody.
Exactly.
But there's no
discovery.
almost frictionless way to exchange that. And of course, the famous problem of artisans, right? Okay, you got Etsy, right? Etsy is now inundated with scumballs and sleazes and things, right? It started out good, but the inevitable multipolar trap of wanting to make more and more money so you can raise more and more money captured Etsy also. But if you had a network like this, a person who was an artisan could do their artisanal thing, could get signals from the network on whether there was demand for this, right? Oh, there is? Oh, you want me to knock off 15 of my custom Hawaiian shirts? Okay, just send me have your agent send me your laser scan of your lumpy ass body, and I will create a custom Hawaiian shirt just for you, right? And oh, by the way.
And you wouldn't do it. Your agent does it, who is controlling the manufacturing stuff and stuff like that. Again, like I totally, like, let me build on that a little bit here, which is, here's a really stupid idea, but an example of kind of how I think this winds up playing out once the whole thing is kind of working at scale. So I'm taking a hike, right? And I'm like, and I've got a headphone on or a pin on or something that has my AI agent that's able to kind of be there with me and extend out into that. And I'm like, hey, I just had this idea for, like kites with paintballs mounted on them that shoot other kites, and it's like battle bots, but it's in the air, right? I was like, just totally random idea. I don't do any of this stuff. And so I'm like, oh, what do you think about that? It's like, I don't know, let me check. And then it goes and it starts a bunch of conversations, and it figures out that, oh, well, these people over here, they have agents whose primary thing is they run the manufacturing, the big 3D printers or whatever, right? And over here, you've got the people who do the software. And over here, you've got the internet TV station, that's interested in covering it. And maybe none of this happens. Maybe it's just a terrible idea. But in practice, today, I'm never going to explore this idea.
It lowers the activation energy for many transactions, or let's call it reactions, to occur. That if you want to reduce to its physics, that's what it is.
Yeah. So like, again, just the bar, like not the bar for validation, but the bar to even consider something, right? And to start putting together the skeleton of how it would actually work with the people who actually are interested in doing it. That goes from being something that's like, okay, I'm going to spend a couple of weeks calling up people and having conversations and explaining the thing and stuff like that. And then at the end of it, I'm going to find out, is this good or is this bad, right? But here it's just like, it's a throwaway thought. And yet I toss the stone into the pond and the ripples propagate by themselves. And depending on how that goes, I either spend time on it or I don't.
Let's enrichen that a little bit. You take your wild idea about battle bots with paintballs, and you just talk into your phone and say, okay, agent, turn this into a vivid description with 4 beautiful slides, right?
And that's very possible today. Yeah,
you can do that today. Right? And oh, by the way, insert it into my midnight network, right? So that we can see if somebody out in the world gives a shit about this, right? And nobody actually wants to spend their time going through rando PowerPoints, but you have people's agents go through the rando PowerPoints, and they know enough about their people eventually that they say, oh, this rare person would love this, so let me put it in front of them in their daily dose of 5 incoming things, right?
Well, see, you're getting ahead of the project that I'm actually working on. I don't want to talk about that yet. Let's just talk about the agents for a second and kind of the framing of how that works. And the reason why I'm so excited in particular about the human agent human thing, right? At the core, when you and I talk, right, like, it's a very high bandwidth conversation, but it's a conversation that's fundamentally informed by the things that we already each believe, and also that are important to us, and also that are going on in the rest of our lives. And so it's not a clean communication, right? It's a communication where I filter what you're saying one way, you filter what I'm saying the other way. This is just human, right? Humans have lives, and this is just kind of the nature of the thing and how we interact. But it also means that a lot of times we get really stuck on, well, here's how I think it should be solved, right? And so when I was looking at this problem a couple of months ago, one of the things that I considered was, should a human be able to tell their agent, here's how I want you to act. Here are the things that I believe, and I want you to believe them too. And what I figured out after creating an unsuccessful prototype that I really hated that did it that way was that that's actually really unhelpful. And that the best thing we can possibly do is we can strip all of the personality off of the individual agents that are representing us. So the way that I've been putting it together is like this. you've got, so I'm the human in this circumstance. I have an agent. I give my agent a name. I talk to my agent. My agent's entire job in this circumstance is to understand the outcomes that are important to me, to understand the end states that I am trying to reach, right? And then as it does that, it builds essentially an anonymized, I call it a matrix, right? Like a table that has, here are all of the outcomes that are important. Here are all of the factors about this person, anonymized, so it doesn't have my name or stuff attached to it, but focusing on that. And then the agents move from that state, which I call the home mind, into a state which I call the business suit. And the business suit, at that point, they have none of the personality, none of the information, none of the conversation that you had with your home mind agent. Instead, all they have is that matrix. And they all have a uniform personality and a uniform protocol by which they discuss and try to surface ideas and figure out if it really is a good kind of fit for other people. So what happens when you start to do this is that where right now, we might have totally disagreeing ideas on what a solution to a given problem is, but we want the same outcome. If we can use this type of system, then we can actually find where those overlaps are and those intersections are by not putting the emotions, by not putting the human stuff into it, and just essentially programmatically looking at, okay, here's what we want reality to be. How could we arrive at that? And where is the consensus relative to the consensus that's needed for it? So again, it's like the key is, and a lot of people try to go down this path, is we do not want AI to become us. We are different than AI, and we're different than AI in that we're self-directed, right? We have an internal sense of the thing. Whereas if you're essentially a collective consciousness, which is essentially what AI is, it can act like it has a single point of, of consciousness, but in reality, it's this giant miasma of everything that has kind of gone into its training. And so it is really a composite personality, and it has no kind of motivation to do anything. So it's the perfect companion for us who have a difficult time executing things, but we know what we want and we know what we like, and we can just look at a thing and we can say, oh, that's what I like. I like that. No, I don't like that. AI can never do that. And so these two things combined together, again, kind of create this meta brain where it's like every human within the system is like a neuron within the brain, right?
No, this is actually a higher level manifestation of what I was very roughly pointing at as the variable human in the loop. In this case, it's a cloud of humans in a dynamic relationship, and that they are further adapting dynamically to the substrates around them.
Yeah, exactly. So the funny part for me about all of this is that, like, I don't particularly care about making it. I mostly just want it to exist, but I do love being first. But like that idea for the like incidental delivery system that I was talking about, I wrote a story about this like 15 years ago. And I found that every time I look at an aspect of this where it's like, well, you could do the barter system, but you would need a way to actually do, transportation of the goods at a small scale between different places. I just find that I've already written a thing about that. And so it turns out I've been dreaming about this like for 20 years and just didn't know it until I thought about it last year. But like I said, I'm really excited about it. And again, the implications as you go deeper in, what does this do to politics, right? Our entire system of representative politics is based around the notion that it's impossible for every individual to be represented. That's not true anymore with this type of a system. And there are so many other opportunities like that. So we're in this weird period right now where we're at like peak complexity, right? Like absolute peak complexity for anything you want to do. As an example, like Grand Theft Auto 6, right? Video game, it's been in development for 13 or 14 years at this point. It's going to be amazing. I bet you there's never a game that takes this long again after this. Because, like one of the things I've been playing with is integrations of these AIs into like by third parties into like games like Skyrim. So Elder Scrolls and also Fallout has an integration. And you can see what's about to happen, which is that we're going to move from handcrafted games that have a lot of detail put into them, but it has to be widely spread over everything, to games where 5 to 10 times more detail is going to be put into the framework and the way that the whole thing is put together. But the incidental, like what that guy says or what this guy says or what that guy does is just going to be completely generative. It's already incredibly impressive. I can't even express it.
Let's kick it up a level and let me propose a more concentrated way to think about this,
Please.
which is creating a dynamic system of humans plus AI plus orchestration plus the dynamics that come from that will produce emergences that are actually interesting from the dynamics of the interactions of these multiple classes of systems, basically a human AI hybrid that can explore interestingness space dynamically.
I would say that that's correct. The big question being, how deep does the integration go? Like, I think there are a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't know if there are a lot of people. There are people who are like, well, the thing that I want to do is I want to integrate this with my brain so that I can think it, 100 times faster than I could normally. I kind of don't. Sure, some people are going to do that, but I got to tell you, I think that I like this equilibrium because the core of it is, right, like I said, like complexity has just been exploding. And so if what we can do is we can keep the complexity, because there's a lot of advantages that come to it, but we can make it so that as humans, we spend our lives doing stuff that we like to do, like having ideas and figuring out whether they're interesting, like just being normal humans would be if we didn't have to do all this additional process, but we had all this complexity. It just seems like that's kind of where this is going. So you get to this point where at this like point of peak complexity and also peak difficulty and expensiveness to pull it off. And the complexity can now go higher because the cost to pull it off is going to go lower, both in money, but also more importantly, cognitively. The cost is just going to fall off.
In attention. Yeah, this is what I was getting at. And when I think about all the themes that we've talked about here together, is we can allow the capacity of the system to go way up while we reduce the tax of the human in the loop.
We can also do another thing, which is to solve the problem that you were talking about with like selling stereo equipment or buying stereo equipment. And people are concerned that the people who they're making deals with are not good faith actors, right? That assumption is because we're human. And so again, like I think we've talked about this before, if you look at, like the prisoner's dilemma, classic game theory problem, right? The best thing that can happen there is that both people are like, yes, right? If it's yes, no, and if everybody goes yes, then everybody wins. If everybody goes no, then everybody loses. If one person goes no, then the guy who went yes loses, et cetera. That's because there's uncertainty about how will that actor behave because you do not have appropriate information to actually make that assessment the vast majority of the time. And that's the important part of the business suit between this, is that by stripping away all of that and actually protocolizing, not how humans interact, but how agents representing humans interact with each other, we can make it so that we can take what is right now it's kind of a, it's a coin flip, whether or not this is a good choice or not. And we can say, okay, well, actually we have 150 examples of these parties acting in good faith together. And in doing so, like once you've established that history, it's really stupid to break the chain and be like, well, I'm going to betray this time because it'll get me a win, but it'll cause them to lose. And it starts that kind of dynamic ping-ponging back and forth of retribution. If with this type of approach, we can completely eliminate that in essentially everything except for physicality. And I think that is downstream of the bigger kind of trust problem that's not really about physicality.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. What's really interesting is that just having this conversation is stretching my ability to even conceive of what might be coming, which I think is absolutely correct. We talked about this in the pregame discussion. This is us bloviating about what might be possible in the next 6 to 12 months, right? And beyond that,
yeah,
damn.
It's when I've been talking to people about this, it's like ahead of us is a bank of fog, and while we're on this side of the fog bank, we can't see what's on the other side. And while we're in the fog bank, when we get there, we can't see what's on the other side. But at some point, we'll emerge, and then it'll be obvious what's on the other side. And that's really kind of the situation I think we find ourselves in. So what it means is that it's a really good time. I think I talked about this last time, like wasn't really the time to build then, maybe still not the time to build now, although if you're even the slightest bit technical and really passionate about it, it is a good time to build now. But imagining that future and trying to figure out how can this work in ways that aren't horribly disruptive, to lots of people, like it just feels like this thing's gonna fucking sneak up on us and there's just no way around that. So I think it's really good to at least do some of the pre-thinking about it. And that's kind of the place that I'm at right now. and trying to have experiments with these things, because my life over the last 12 or 13 years has been has been characterized by a pattern of figuring out something really cool that's going to be a thing in 5 to somewhere in that range, 5 years in advance, and then experimenting with it and building the thing, and then I'm way too early. And this time, this thing is moving so fast that I am still early. We're probably 6 months early relative to kind of where it's going, but the potential of the thing and just like the how it would change the world is so kind of just crazy to me. Anyways, like I said, I'm really excited about it. What I'm doing right now with it is I've been working with a couple of people to build the kind of closed source, absolute minimum viable product version of this thing. Because the key to these types of networks is that you actually need to have a lot of people in them in order for them to really be useful, right? In order for that intelligence to do that. And so, as far as I can tell, now is the time to do that. So what I've been building is the version of this tool. It's really stripped down. That's not about doing. It's for the agents. It's just about opportunity discovery, right? It's called Midnight Protocol, midnightprotocol.org. There's a sign up there that you can sign up for. We'll probably be out with beta sometime next month. And like I said, I'm trying to get it really, really cheap because I want a lot of people to sign up, and there will be free accounts and stuff like that too. But the idea here is that essentially you onboard by talking to your agent, and your agent, over the course of about 4 conversation turns, understands the outcomes that you are looking to achieve, and understands kind of the other factors about you. And then after that, you're pretty much done. And then every night at midnight, it will run an assessment essentially of the entire pool. Nice, the GPT-5 allows you to shove 400,000 tokens into a single input now. That solved the problem where I was using lesser intelligence for it. And then it sort of creates this list of matches of people who have not been matched yet. And then it takes each of those matches even if they're really low probability, and it will then have the agents actually talk to each other. It does like a kind of strategic assessment and a conversation back and forth between the 2 agents, but it's all cards on the table, so there's no real pleasantries. Everybody knows everything, and it's all anonymized at that point. And then they determine collectively if there's actually a good reason for these people to know each other, and then they create, an assessment, and they write here's an explanation to this user about why this would be a good connection. Here's an explanation to this user, or maybe not. Maybe there's no connection whatsoever, and in that case, the only piece of useful information that comes out of that is that each agent asks each other, is there any other agent that you've talked to over any of your prior conversations who would be useful for my person to talk to? And so it's this sort of exponential discovery thing. And then whatever happens, whether there are hits or there are misses, then it pops it all into essentially a custom written newsletter for each individual person, sends it off to them, and then if there are like really good matches that are above a certain percentage, then there's a button or a link you click that's right underneath that one that says request introduction effectively. And then it actually connects you guys over email, but we're going to use obfuscated emails. So it'll be, like your username plus a numeral at midnightprotocol.org or something like that. So that's kind of the idea. It's really simple, but it's also, I think, really, really powerful. And the coolest part about it is that, if you look at something like LinkedIn, which a lot of people have who I've brought in to test have been like, oh, this is better LinkedIn. And then you kind of look over at something else, right? And it's like, oh, I'm looking for people who I want to play video games with, or I'm looking for people who I socialize with and want to be friends with, or something like that, right? And all of these things, you'd never go to LinkedIn and be like, hey, do you want to play video games with me? It's just not the context of what's going on there. But that's because all of these platforms are built on this concept of, one, you should go to the platform a lot. That's a key to their business model. 2, they're very specific to what they're doing, because in the past, when you are creating a profile and a system is trying to understand you, you can't be yourself. You have to pick, here's the thing from the drop down that defines me, here's the radial box or whatever, that defines me. And as a result of that, these networks have to be very narrow because they're stupid. And what we're, I think, going to see with these new networks is that the network is just the network, right? The network is that's the source of truth, the source where everything happens, but how it's presented to you, what you want to get from it, how you interact with it, those are all things that will be entirely customized based on exactly what you're looking for. So it's not an early use case, but it's obvious that these types of things will also become dating, services and stuff like that. Because again, once you start building that network effect, whether it's me or somebody else, like it's just going to be everything, and it just makes sense to do that, which is why I think it's going to be important for it to be an open protocol at some point.
And I think you hit on one of the things that's sort of not obvious, maybe, but it's huge, which is the transformer LLM revolution has made natural language an interface that can be worked analytically easily, right?
And turned into code.
That's what, and turned into data to the degree you want it to be turned into data, or turned into code, or turned into both, right? And humans, we have high dimensional skills in the area of language. Most people do not have high dimensional skills in code, nor do they really have high dimensional skills in picking check boxes. And, how often is it when you go to some idiot sign-up thing and asks you what's your title or your job description, and you look at the list, you go, none of this is even fucking close, right? Or why are you interested in this product? And again, they give you 6 options, none of which are even close. If you just said, give me 15 seconds of talk about why you're interested in this. And until recently, there was nothing much they could do with that. But now LLMs are great at dealing with that.
Incredible at dealing with it.
And so this is basically changing the impedance matching between humans who are powerful and high dimensional in language and relatively weak in structured analytics, with computers who historically were the opposite. And LLMs are the magic that allows the two pieces to work together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say it's even more than that. Just think about how LinkedIn actually operates. We're talking about the onboarding, right? And how you're fitting yourself into these boxes that fit in perfectly, but it's just what you have to do to work within that type of system. But once you're in there, I mean, Jim, how many people do you think you've met over LinkedIn who cold approached you where you were like, oh yeah, this is something I'm going to spend time on? Is it one?
No, it's more than that. It's probably over.
Oh, it's more than that. Okay, good.
It's probably 20. I probably have...
over how many years?
Probably 20 years.
So we can say ish one per year.
One per year. And I will say a fair number of them have been... they've been all kinds of weird things. And one of the things that makes LinkedIn actually useful for me is I only look at it about once a month. And I just go through them and I go, shit. Ah, interesting. Let me ping that guy back and see what.
You're better than I am. I go through it every once in a while. I'm like, accept all so this stops emailing me. That's essentially it. It's a great strategy to build a big useless network, is what I found.
Yeah, it's not quite useless, but I have odd and very Catholic taste, very broad things I could conceivably be interested in. Also, I think it makes me different than most, is I am just barely high enough visibility in the world that most of the people that approach me, well, of course, 90% of it's shit, but the 10% that's not just pure shit is people who have some idea what I'm about.
The point I'm making is very simply that all of these systems are systems where, to the extent that they are potentially useful to you, right? Not useful to you, potentially useful to you, there's a direct correlation between the amount of time and, to a certain extent, the amount of money. I assume you could pay somebody to run your LinkedIn or something like that if you wanted to. But in practice, LinkedIn for me has just always kind of been useless, right? I'm very well networked. I was well known for a long time. But the core of it is that I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit there and do that activity. And in practice, what I find is that the vast majority of people who do that activity are people who are throwing, messages in bottles into the ocean, essentially.
Looking for a job, yeah, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's so again, this all comes down to it's not worth our time. It's not worth our time to work LinkedIn because the expected return is poor, even if you work it. And that's not that different from doing nothing and having poor results, right? Whereas this is kind of the inverse. Again, just the core idea of this is the opposite of that, where you spend essentially no time except looking at things that are already validated. Now, there is a question here about how good is the validation?
Of course, that's going to be the key fitness function, and it won't be perfect at first, right?
Definitely not at first. But again, if you look at the course.
But now let's assume LinkedIn messages, let's say, have a value of, let me run the numbers here. I probably get, how many do I get? Maybe 10 a day times 300 days, 3,000 a year, and one hit. So they have a value of 1 in 3,000. So you can certainly do better than that. But you probably need to get it down to like 1 in 5 to impress people.
Well, or you just need to make sure that it takes essentially no time and no effort and no money. If you do those things, then
If you send me 5 a day and one is good, that's well worth it, right?
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So that's kind of the idea, is that, again, like with LinkedIn, if you're really working it, then you might be talking with, 50 people a month or something. And that's like if you're really working it, and you have some other advantages. But with this type of system, again, like the things I've been pricing, like we're going to give free users like 1 to 3 conversations per night, essentially. So that stacks up to somewhere between like 30 and 90 potential conversations. And again, they are one-to-one conversations between your agent and someone else's agent, both of you with the incentive, both of them with the explicit instructions and only purpose to filter, to discover and to filter, right? And then for paid accounts, which is, like I said, going to be like $5 or $6 a month or something, it's going to be like 30 or 40 conversations per night, depending on where we wind up with technology. And so there you're talking about like 500, 600, even more exposure. So even if the hit rate is like 1%, you're still talking about that's a lot more than you're kind of able to generate with the other approach. So it all comes down to network effect and stuff like that.
Well, network effect and automated discernment. How good is the discernment?
Well, let's just assume that the discernment is already sufficient and going to get better as time goes on. If we assume that, then it stops being a question.
You want to nerd out on this product a little bit, because I do have a few ideas on it. It's both an opportunity and a risk, right? The discernment will get better the more the system knows about each of the players, right?
Yes, we've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah, you start off with your 4 questions or whatever it is. Okay, you got a fair idea, but really, you want it. It should suck in my LinkedIn, right? You can buy a 600 data item profile from Axiom for 10 cents, right? It has a scary amount of information about you. Do you have a fishing license? What magazines have you ever subscribed to? What's your criminal? I think you can get your criminal record for 10 cents. I don't know. But anyway, you can get for $1. You can get so much money from wholesale, so much information from wholesale things, but that would have to be kept in a secure, really, truly secure blanket. Both Axiom wouldn't want you to leak that information to the world, and nor would the participants want to take the risk that, oh yeah, he got a treatment for the clap 3 months ago at the clap clinic, right? A ironclad, secure profile vault could be necessary to allow this thing to know each person better, but not share what it knows. Frankly, we already have a model for that, which is Facebook, right? God knows what it knows about us. I think there is a way to figure out get it to tell you what it thinks it knows about you, and it's usually half wrong. But to make this thing really good, you'd want it to have, more than Facebook, but not be willing to share it even back to yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks around how much information you really need, because certainly having more information is better in some ways, but it's worse in other ways, right? Because effectively what you want with these agents is you want them to have all of the useful, relevant, correct context about you, not about what you were 5 years ago. That might be useful as a part of it, but it's not the relevant part of that. And so a conversation we've been having on kind of an ongoing basis is how much of that, because one of the guys who I'm working with on this, Nick Underwood, he has a project that he built a couple of months ago that's basically a private context engine that can generate context and then can store it and conserve it privately. So like I said, I've built a lot of things that have been very early and very overbuilt in the past. And with this one, I'm really trying not to do that. I'm trying to just be like, all right, well, is this anything at this point? And if it is, then we can build more. And if it's not, then not. What we've spent over the last month or so is rebuilding it so that it has non-vibe coded security, because that is fundamentally the problem with anything that's these fast prototypes, is they are utterly atrocious. And we just got a really great example of that with that app T, which was, all of its information, again, totally vibe coded, really impressive that they were able to get as far as they were, totally predictable that it completely imploded, because their security just wasn't there. So that really is one of the challenges, is as you get out of the prototyping phase and into and I actually want people to use this and we're going to collect some information, like the bar goes up vertical, essentially.
Yeah, that's one of the things you would not want to, you can't skimp on. You're going to have to hire a first-class security guy. Fortunately, I have found the LLMs are surprisingly good at vetting your code for security issues.
Yeah, for other people's, for that other LLMs have written. That really was the most fun part about the Max 20 subscription to Claude that I discontinued last month, was just like the ability to be like, cool, audit the entire code base against all of the documents, please, and give me a triaged list that I can then give back to the other ones. That eventually, of course, you just have Claude fix it. So it's a really magical time to be alive and to be doing stuff like this.
This is really quite exciting, and I look forward to your project for sure, and I also look forward to the greater exploration of this space to try to capture the ability to produce a good for humanity emergence out of the capacity of humans plus the exponentially growing capacity of AIs.
Yeah.
And that will be great if it comes out good. But if it turns out to, here's the flip side of this, right? It was a conversation I had with a dear friend last week, which is to the degree we keep this as paid services that have to provide value for money, these things can become a huge benefit for humanity. The instant they go ad supported, and they will, then their ability to corrupt our brains, insert false ideas in our heads, do serious damage to humanity, I think is greater than the internet was.
Yeah, totally. But I think it's going to go pretty well. I really, really do think that we are on the right path for all of these things. Because again, the question was always, what was going to be the difference between the most expensive, biggest proprietary models and the stuff that was just freely available? Again, like today, you can buy a Nano, or you can buy a NVIDIA Jetson. It's not sufficient to run LLMs, like real smart LLMs right now, but it costs $250, and it's a piece of hardware that you plug in, and then that's it. That's the extent of what you do with the thing, right?
Let me give you the counterexample here that we all thought the internet would be mostly, at least I did. A lot of us were pioneers, even the pre-internet days. We thought we were doing work for good citizenship, make the world better. And the theory was, well, voters would have all this access to information. They'll make better decisions, right?
Sure.
And instead, we got this amazing crosstalk of horse shit. We got exploitable networks. And, the net result is
human problems.
The politics today is way stupider than it was in 1965, despite 1965, half the adults not having graduated from high school, right? How did that happen, right? You could say the internet's a fair bit of that.
So I barely graduated from high school. I went to technical school to be an audio engineer. I have no formal training whatsoever, and I'm so happy that I didn't participate in the education thing. So I would argue that perhaps the increasing percentage of people who have gone through the education system over the last 30 years is actually a big part of the problem. But we could set that aside.
It's possible.
There's advantages and disadvantages to it. I'm just saying it's not exactly a one-to-one here.
Exactly. That's it. Fair enough. I do think we need to be very aware that, because what you're designing is a good faith offering that will provide value to people. But you can also see how Cory Doctorow's concept of the enshittification of everything. This thing could easily be enshittified. And let me give you an example. The horrifyingness of, say, social media or Twitter. The revenue from Facebook it gets from advertising for its average user is $2 a month. Twitter was $1. Then it fell as low as 25 cents. Now it's back to like 55 cents. So we have allowed ourselves to have our brains fucked by the algorithms for $2 a month. And of course, there was a path dependency. When Facebook started, such a thing would probably have cost $20 a month to run on a pay basis, and that was too much. But almost anybody, at least in the West, can afford $2 a month not to be fucked with by an honest, good faith Facebook, but there's no way to get there. How do we keep this from happening in your model where, well, it's a little too expensive right now, or it's not quite good enough, but hell, I'll do it for free. And so the Zuckerberg clone in this space builds the free version, which he's losing money like a motherfucker for a while, which Facebook did, right? But as the curves go, he eventually gets to what's profitable, but he sucked us in to use it for free, and he's generating $2 a month per user and fucking with our heads way worse than Facebook does.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this stuff comes down to what I kind of describe as the sword and the shield dynamic, which is that when a new technology innovation comes out, it tends to be very unevenly distributed and it's weaponized against us. For instance, you get like spam calls probably constantly. I haven't answered my phone in years and I have 600 plus text messages sitting there in my phone because it's just not useful to me. The signal to noise ratio is way terrible, right? So we've had the bad parts happen, We haven't had the good parts happen. And so the shield part is the part that I think will resolve these issues for us, which is that our agent will filter these things for us like it filters everything else for us. And this is why it's so important that the agents be something that are beholden only to us.
Yes, that's the key right there.
That is totally the key, but it's happening. That's the point.
The economic model has to be that I am hiring this agent on my behalf, but that means you have to pay, right?
But the cost, again, Jetson, already $250, right? Who in the modern world doesn't have a smartphone at this point? I would say that it's a very small percentage of people, and many people have multiple smartphones. I have been convinced for several years, and I'm more convinced now than ever, that we will see either specialized chips go into standard phones that allow you to run these local, very powerful local models on par with what we have now with, something like GPT-5. You will be able to run it on your phone. And once it's running on your phone and it's open source, then ain't nobody there but you and it. It's got nothing to do. It's entirely reliant for its ongoing existence on your continuing to find a useful. And so the incentives are lined up almost perfectly.
Well, the network part, though, is where I'm more concerned, right?
So explain the concern.
In other words, you're building what's called the Midnight Protocol network. And that also has to operate in good faith, even more so, right? Because it's dealing with actual questions. The abstraction of having a transformer on your phone, that's kind of cool. And yeah, it can do some cool things. But I'm going to predict that your Midnight Protocol is actually going to add more value to a customer than having a GPT-5 level.
But that's what I'm talking about, is the AI that lives on your phone is your agent in Midnight Protocol. That's the point.
But the protocol itself could have some corruptions in it, right?
Oh, yeah, right. So again, like when we're talking about the project I'm working on right now, Midnight Protocol is like hey, I want to get something out there. If it's an open source project, it'll, and it's hard to use, then ain't nobody going to use this. So we might as well just offer it to people to use it for free, because the cost is so low to us. And it's valuable to build network effect, or, pay $5, whatever, and get a much, much better version of the thing, right? So that's kind of the now vision, because you can't do the local thing at scale today, right? Like I can run almost any model locally on my computers, and it's amazing. And those are, I've spent maybe $15,000, $10,000, I think, on computer stuff over the last couple of years that has enabled me to do this very high-end stuff, but definitely, not $80,000 for a single GPU, for instance, which has been the norm for a very long time. So that trend is continuing and will continue, where these models just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so right now, the focus for me is on, well, how do we just get people using this to see if it even works? But the bigger project, of which this is a subset, is this thing called the Networked Delegation and Negotiation Protocol, or Networked Delegation and Negotiation Ecosystem, NDNE. And the idea there is that is the full open source protocol for this thing. That is the place, but really it's designed to be a more in-depth version, where instead of agents just talking to agents, there's actually essentially bootstrapped on top of a forum system. And the agents make posts on the forum system, and there's a long-term history and discoverability, and the entire thing is auditable. And you have this additional layer of decentralized AI, people running nodes on their local computers that I call stewards, who are basically the referees of the system and maintain the protocol and can see everything and stuff like that. But I agree with you, transparency is wildly important. I keep getting distracted from it, and I really want to talk about vendor relationship management, or VRM. You are familiar, of course, with the concept CRM, customer relationship management. And I will say upfront, this is not my idea. This is something that an advisor turned me on to about a month ago, and I read it, and it's for a book called The Intention Economy by a guy named Doc Searles from, I think, 2007 or 2008. And basically, so customer relationship management is the world that we live in today. It's the world where if you're a business and you want to get customers, then you need to proactively go out and look for those customers and basically just throw lots of awareness at them, lots of ads or whatever, in order to get them to be like, you know what, I might want that, and then go over and actually buy it from you, right? And so that's the world that we live in today. And it's the world that we live in today because it's impractical to do everything else, right? So what VRM, the idea is essentially, is what if every individual had a purchasing agent, like a business, whose entire job it was to understand what you like, even if you haven't necessarily asked for it yet, but they know you're going to need it, and then to go out and find the opportunities, find the deals with which to do it. So instead of it being a pull business, where the businesses are going out and trying to pull people in, it's actually a push that's coming from the customers. Now remember, they came up with this 20 years ago about And so the idea was for these things that they called fourth parties, and the fourth party is a third party representative of the user. And so as a result of that, a couple of things happened that I think are really, really cool that have never made it into real life because it was impossible until now. But now it's possible. One of those things is when you go to a website or a service or whatever, and you sign a terms of service, you don't read it. And you don't read it because it's take it or leave it, right? It doesn't matter what the thing is. And people, just kind of make assumptions about whether they're good. And even if you read it, it's not terribly useful to do that because you don't have a choice. And that's, again, because they are pulling you into an existing standard agreement because it's implausible to do anything else. But in a system that involves fourth parties, you can actually, with your fourth party, with your AI agent in my world, you can be like, well, here are the things that I'll accept and here are the things that I don't accept. So actually, here's my terms of service that I need anybody I do business with to agree to. And so in this world, again, there's no marketing cost anymore for these businesses. And so instead, what happens is their third party and my fourth party negotiate and they say, hey, well, here are the things that we require. And it's like, well, here's the things I'll accept. And then here's the unique subset of the agreement that now can exist, then that makes it so everybody is happy with the relationship and gets what they need. And again, 20 years ago, this would have meant you had companies and you had people whose entire jobs it was to do this. And so again, it's like, if you're Elon Musk, well, yeah, shit, man, this is probably how you can live your life, no problem. But if you're like a normal person, it's totally implausible. So what these AI agents do is they mesh these concepts together so that you can not only have representation as far as this opportunity discovery, but we can really, in a practical way, move towards this idea of the intention economy. But I'm curious for your thoughts on it.
It's interesting. I was briefly on the board of a company that tried to do this 25 years ago.
And it was too early.
And they were ridiculously overfunded and they didn't accomplish shit, right?
Ridiculously overfunded plus 25 years too early is a pretty bad combination.
Yeah, exactly. And I frankly was only on the board a few months when I pulled the ripcord and said, people, we should just shut this fucker down. You're not making any progress. You're burning $5 million a month or something crazy like that in 2000, right? And if you actually want to deploy this thing, you have a $30 million CapEx coming up between now and the end of the year. Here's my argument why we should just pull a ripcord and shoot this thing in the head. I was not popular with the founder or the investors or anybody else, but that's what happened. Within a month or two, people said, okay. One of the ideas was, for instance, it would negotiate your insurance policy for you, right? At that time, this was early in cell phone age when cell phone deals were constantly shifting and big incentives were paid to switch networks and stuff, right when portability of numbers had come into play. So one of the things that was touted as one of the things that would negotiate constantly, daily, behind the scenes, cell phone deals for you and put yourself out as a person who was willing to switch their number if you would pay me something to switch, right? There was like 25 of these obviously negotiable, transactable things, but the infrastructure to build it was just out of fucking control.
And who was the target audience for that? I bet you that the target audience for it was a pretty high level of person, right? You're not talking about this is 100% of the population.
In those days, it was a person with an income of, say, $75,000 a year in 2000.
Okay, so upper middle class in 2000. Well, not upper middle class in 2000.
$150,000 a year person now. So just below upper middle class, the upper end of middle class.
There's just so many things like this where it's like one of the things I love about disruptive technologies, and I haven't been doing it too much recently, but back in the kind of tokenization days where I was working on creating non-currency tokens for all sorts of real world representations of things, if people are interested in being part of the initial test, whether as a free user or, paying $5 a month, which it looks like is what the price is probably going to be, you can head over to midnightprotocol.org and just sign up for notifications of when the thing is out. Like I said, we're tightening up security right now, and now I have to retune everything based on these new models, but it's so good. We were talking about the, like the 4 questions. There are no 4 questions. That's the key. There's just one question, and then there's follow-ups to it. And there's follow-ups to it not like, well, that's a really interesting detail that's totally irrelevant to the thing that we're doing. Why don't you tell me more about that? It was that when I was using Kimmy. Kimmy K2 was real bad about getting that right. But I ran it with GPT-5 chat, which is a less powerful version of the thing. And it was incredibly profound. It really understood me and put it all together and asked exactly the right questions. And again, it's not about the fact that happened with GPT-5. It's where are we in 3 months? Where are the capabilities for this a year from now? I can't even imagine. But It's definitely too early still.
I have the same tendency to be too early, but in a world that's going crazy exponential, it's kind of hard to be too early.
Yeah, indeed.
For long,
Indeed.
right?
Time horizons really collapse. So
as long as you build, and again, this is hugely important. This is advice I'm giving to everybody I talk to who's privately, and how to run your business kind of stuff, is you have to build the whole thing assuming you don't know shit about the future, and so that it's very flexible. And of course, when we write software, there's always a trade-off of flexibility versus getting it done quick, right? You knock something out that's rigid, that just narrowly does what you want done right now, 5 times faster than you can build a flexible, well-engineered framework that's future-proof, which we used to call it.
Framework is, I think, the important way to think about all of this stuff increasingly is that we are not laying the bricks anymore in any of this stuff. And increasingly, this will be true. The thing that we are doing is we are deciding, I want a fireplace over there, something like that. And then that's the important part. And if that's the important part, then it means we get to spend so much time figuring out what we actually want to do. And I think that's actually been one of the most difficult transitions for me, is that I'm so used to things taking a long time, but still jumping into them, that now I'm like, oh, well, I could also do that. And I could also do that. And it's a horrible habit that I have to get past. But that's the world that we live in now, where the biggest problem is that you can very easily bite off more than you can chew. And it's not like, oh, I did a small open source project. It's like, oh, I created this entirely new thing that nobody has ever done before and nobody knows how it works. And it's just what a time to be alive, man.
It is. I definitely envy you younger guys. I say all the time, if I was 45, I would do the $1 trillion opportunity. But I'm too old, too rich, and too lazy to get off my ass. And then, besides, it's time for the younger generation to step up and do something. So thank you very much, Adam, for a live view of the cutting edge of what's happening now, people. And this has really been an extraordinarily interesting conversation that I think will help people think about what the hell's going on. And also, don't shy away from doing some of this stuff yourself. It ain't that hard, right?
Crazy ideas are really a great thing to spend time thinking about now. Not too crazy, but pretty crazy compared to any other time in the past is a really good time. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Joe.
It was great. Audio production and editing by Andrew Blevins Productions. Music by Tom Muller at modernspacemusic.com.